Welcome so much to this seminar and to us in Forum and our new office. It's also the new meeting space for the civil society. And we're also recording today, just so all of you are aware. And this seminar is a part of the Bærekraftsuka, the Sustainable Week. So we have a lot of different arrangements and seminars this week and also next week. So you can see the program. It's hanging on the walls and some of the doors. So I really recommend all of you to check it out as well. And today we are asking the question is there any hope for the Paris Agreement? Because we are in a huge crisis. It's rising temperatures, it's more and more extreme weathers, and at the same time we also have a serious energy crisis. And the lack of clean and renewable energy has also led some of the African countries to wanting to look for more oil and gas. And they point to Norway and say, if Norway as a rich country can do it, we should as well. And as well as the climate crisis, it also leads to degradation of nature, growing food insecurity, and growing inequality. So the world is really on fire, and it's quite easy to lose some hope in all of this. I don't think I'm alone when I sometimes feel really frustrated and a bit sad and angry about how the world is going, not exactly in the right direction all the time. But hope is really necessary in order for us to find solutions, find changes, and act for a better and more sustainable world. So to answer the question of hope, we have a beautiful panel today that will discuss this, and hopefully they will give us some hope. But first we have Karen O'Brien, who will share some of her thoughts and theory of change as well. She is a world-leading climate researcher, as many of us. She's a human geographer and been a part of the IPCC climate panel for several years as well. So we are really looking forward to hear your thoughts first, and then we will have a discussion with more different thoughts and perspectives. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me, and congratulations on your new space. I want to just in the next 20 minutes present you a little bit with my own journey, and I'm here today because I'm also very, concerned about the situation and the crisis. And sure, yeah, I'm also equally concerned about the situation right now, and equally struggling with how to actually keep that momentum and energy and optimism. And I want to just kind of walk you through my own journey from as a realist to being an agential realist, and actually seeing the hope, the potential, and the possibility for rapid social change. So, hope for the Paris Agreement. You matter more than you think. And this is a little bit about my journey towards my passion project of writing this book about quantum social change for a thriving world. And the journey really began in 1988 when, like many of you, I was a master's student starting in the program for environmental studies at University of Wisconsin, and it was a hot summer, so it was kind of on the radar. And James Hansen testified in front of Congress that summer and said, climate change has begun. I was like, oh, what's climate change? What are we talking about? And so I took every course I could on past climates and climatology and ecology, and really trying to figure out, what does this mean for humans? What does it mean for the environment? What does it mean for the future? And so that kind of, that led me to, from 1988, it has been, as like many of you, it just kind of has been like the driving force in, moving me forward. And I recognize, where back then I was like, oh, by the 2020s we will have this under control. We'll be looking back and we'll see some statistical signals in the data, etc. But really, where we are right now is just, unprecedented wildfires that are, means that it's, based on our relationship to land. So we're seeing environmental catastrophes again and again and again. We're seeing that we're, it's actually influencing people's lives and people's livelihoods. And we're failing to actually reduce vulnerability and risk at a time when we should be. And that, I think that, having working on adaptation, working on
the solutions to climate change, we think like, yeah, as Lillian said earlier, like we're failing. And at the same time, we see the wealth gap widening. Fewer and fewer people have more and more money, more and more money, and more people have less. And so the injustice dimensions are loud and clear, and I think that's something that we have to take in. And every day when we read the newspapers, we hear about just, like where the future is already heading. And these losses are, just very emotional and very difficult to take in. And I know that you know all of this, but, here we are, as we just heard, that, oil companies are getting a bonanza. There's money in this. So like, wow, 2022, and where are we? And that's where, I think many people feel very sad. And, I think, yeah, it's really easy to get to give up and just say like game over, or depressed, and just say like it's too late. But if any of you saw the movie Don't Look Up, it's also the time to look up and say, what do we do now? And this is something I do all the time. like, wow, how do we actually respond? And how do we transform at the rate, the scale, the speed, and the depth that is called for right now by the science, by the governments, by civil society? And that's really where I'm just wondering, are we asking the wrong question, and are we answering, framing the problem all wrong? We're asking the question, can we meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target? And it's not a question of whether or not we can do it, it's how. Because what we know, and we really need to look at it not just as a global average temperature, like an absolute, but it's really a marching order for transformations on behalf of current and future generations, on behalf of all species. So if we start to look at this not as a whether but a how issue, then we've got to go really deep into how do we transform. And right now I'm co-chairing an assessment by the Biodiversity Panel, Naturpanel, IPBES, on transformative change. And one of the questions all governments in the world are asking is, how do we transform? Tell us, don't tell us what to do, but give us the options. And so, how do we do that? And I think that, looking at it as a relationship issue is really an entry point for thinking differently about how we relate to change. Relationships describe the way in which two or more people or things are connected, or the state of being connected. So we are always in relation to the climate, we are in relation to each other, and when I look at the issue of climate change, it's really about how do I relate to myself, to others, to nature, to the environment, to the future, and to change itself. And it brings in this issue of, this big picture of social consciousness. To what extent am I aware of my relationship to, distant others, future generations, etc. And Marilyn Schlitz and her colleagues define social consciousness as the level of explicit awareness a person has of being part of a larger whole. And this is just a picture from a globular from the Hubble telescope that just is telling us these amazing things about the universe. And at the same time, we're just kind of stuck in a pattern in humanity. So our pattern in terms of relationships is about drawing a line between me and you and us and others, society and the environment, and humans and nature. And we tend to kind of keep that as a firm environment, a firm line, and we're always just going like, oh, how, we got to get people to change. We got to change others as if they're just objects to be changed and not subjects of change in their own life. And this creates fragments. This creates a society that is increasingly polarized, increasingly not together, increasingly talking about post-truth, fake facts and all this stuff. And there's no common narrative on what we want to do right now and how. And David Bohm, in his book Wholeness and the Implicate Order, has written, what is primarily needed is a growing realization of the extremely great danger of going on with a fragmentary process of thought. And that fragmentation in our thinking comes out in how we design cities, how we design solutions, who's included, who's excluded, and yeah, it has such important things. And he was writing this in 1980. And so where do we take that? And this brings us then to, looking at, like, where is the leverage for systems change? And I think, for those of you who are familiar with Donella Meadows' leverage and places to intervene in a system, when she talks about leverage points, she talks about a lot of things that we're doing right now of, tweaking the parameters and the numbers as being very low leverage and often pushing the system in the other direction. And as she goes on to looking at like higher and higher leverage points, it's the feedbacks, it's the information flows, it's the rules of the systems, it's the power to change the rules of the system, and then it's the goals of the system and the paradigms. And even the highest leverage point that she identifies is the power to transcend paradigms and just, to just look at it from a very, raising the issue of uncertainty. And so this is, I think, what kind of led me to to look into, from a more philosophical perspective, that the Enlightenment paradigm still informs much of science today. And although social sciences and the humanities have been challenging that, the mechanistic, atomistic, deterministic, reductionist, and materialist view of the world still reigns even in IPCC reports and even in the way we're looking at these very techno-managerial and behavioral solutions to a problem that is much bigger and much deeper than that. And so, we also have many, many people in the world who don't buy into that, who would have what Andreas Weber, biologist and philosopher, describes as an enlivenment worldview. And an enlivenment worldview brings in lived experience, embodied meaning, subjectivity, consciousness, interbeing, and spirituality. So it goes into this thing of like, wow, how do we actually relate? It brings in the relatedness. And relational paradigms are the heart of many indigenous and local knowledge systems. There's a relational turn in the social sciences. We're starting to realize that, like, wow, the universe is just, it's a big relationship. Wow. But our policies and practices are still based on a very Newtonian paradigm of us and other and subject and object and that separateness. And so, in physics, they can say reality is not what it seems. And, the search for knowledge is not nourished by certainty. It is nourished by a radical distrust in certainty. And I think that idea, we actually, a lot of, social scientists are now starting to look at uncertainty as the frame for politics. How do we look at that? And I think that's how do we actually challenge not just reality at this this subatomic level, but what is social reality? Are we underestimating our collective capacity for social change by being kind of brainwashed into thinking that we are in these discrete individuals that really do not matter, and that we reduce ourselves to our carbon footprint, to just sorting trash and doing this, when we don't see ourselves as part of these systems, as part of these power relationships, etc. And so, going back and looking at science itself has been telling us for more than 100 years that they're forcing physicists anyway to reshape their ideas of reality, to rethink the nature of things at the deepest level, and to revise their concepts of position and speed, as well as their notions of cause and effect. So when I read this, I was like, yeah, well, what does this mean? And I ran into reading these books, it's not just at the subatomic level. It's quantum biology is telling us that our sense of smell, bird navigation, photosynthesis, all of these processes actually have quantum phenomena. And these authors say quantum mechanics is normal. It's the world that it describes that is weird. And I'm interested in the world that it describes, this weird world. And I want to know, how do we actually move in a different direction? And Alexander Wendt, a political scientist who was really critical in developing constructivism in international relations, he kind of got interested in this, and I came across his work maybe 12 years ago or so, and he says, just if we develop social sciences today, what would it look like? And it certainly wouldn't be linked to a classical Newtonian world. It would actually take in other ways of seeing and being. So he says, if human beings really are quantum, then classical social science is essentially founded on a mistake, and social life will therefore require a quantum framework for its proper understanding. So I was like, wow, okay, here's some hope. And, everyone knows me, okay. So I write to him, I'm like, what does this mean for climate change? And wait for his response. And he says, well, I think what I'm trying to say is we are like a quantum social organism. I was like, okay, interesting. And so that led me into reading lots of different books. Karen Barad, a feminist theorist, philosopher and physicist, in Meeting the Universe Halfway, Quantum Physics and the Entanglement of Mind and Matter, talks about matter as not a thing but a doing, a congealing of agency through which phenomena come to matter. In other words, to take the, it's a tough, very complex book, but basically saying that we are constantly intra-acting in one system. We are constantly creating the future right here and now and now and now and now, and that matter to be significant and matter as something substantial, it's all about, like how we are and how we're showing up. And that led me then to like this book on quantum social change, which really, I thought, oh, we'll make a short book in response to Carlo Rovelli's idea that the universe is marvelous, but we're headed for extinction because of climate change, because we're not doing anything. And so how do we actually bring that down? And so I was just really trying to think, what would it look like to address climate change from a different paradigm, a la Donella Meadows. And it really has opened up an inquiry for me, which has been really, uncomfortable in many ways, because, and that's what, in thinking about transformations and thinking about the work that we're doing, it really is about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you have to step outside of the paradigm, you have to face being laughed at, you have to face being, just challenged at every level. And so I've gotten, I'm not yet comfortable with being uncomfortable, but I'm getting better. And I think that being able to say like quantum social change would describe this conscious nonlinear process of transformation that is infused with a sense of possibility and potentiality, grounded in a recognition of our inherent oneness and non-local entanglement. And you get people rolling their eyes, don't put quantum and social in the same sentence. It's like, oh, sorry. And it's like, no, the social scientists, don't make physics explain this. And so I've had the critiques come, but I also think to just ask ourselves those questions in a relational perspective. What would it matter? And so this was a project with artist Tone Bjørdam, who's as a part of the Art Connects project that was linked to my Adaptation Connects project. And we worked over the COVID period of her putting artwork to the different ideas. But the main idea that I wanted to look into is can insights from quantum physics and quantum social science inspire social transformations that are not only rapid and effective, as in a quantum leap, metaphorically, but ethical, equitable, and sustainable as well. So can we change the quality of our engagement with climate change? And I'm not going to go through the entire book, so we want to get to the dialogue and discussion, but really looking at this decade matters. If there's anything we know, and for those of you who have taken my class, I think I said that in 2009 and 2010, it's been but every decade matters. We are always in the moment that matters, but it's just so clear now that where we're at right now is we have this possibility to meet the 1.5. We have the potential, and we're heading, as business as usual, we will not get there. We will fail. So we need, what some people are calling social tipping points, critical masses, but how do we get there? And I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is, that we can do better. The bar is so low now, and that everything we do actually does matter for future generations. Because there's a big difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, as we know, and 2 degrees and 3 degrees and 3 degrees and 4 degrees. There's a big difference between 35 centimeters of sea level rise and 1 meter, 2 meters, 7 meters, etc. So it's like, wow, how, what will future generations be thinking when they look back at this time? It's like, oh, they all joined the I give up party, or they actually saw that we were connected. What is the blind spot in front of us that they saw? So just to bring this looking at this decade, looking at the role of paradigms and the role of thought experiments, the role of speculation. How do we actually try to think differently? What role do our beliefs play? Not just the, do you believe in climate change, but I don't believe I matter is even more of an issue, I think, when we're looking at the future. So how do we actually bring up that sense and get people to really see that our relationships are not just classical us and other, but they are entangled, not just from the quantum subatomic scale, but we are entangled through language, through meaning, through values, through shared stories, and that's where quantum social science is pointing. Whether it's quantum decision making, quantum game theory, quantum linguistics, everything. There's really exciting research, and it's just off the radar from the mainstream dialogue. Even metaphorically, we can talk about the role of complementarity, superposition, quantum leaps, etc. And metaphors create our reality. The greenhouse effect is a metaphor. Everything we talk about in science is a metaphor. The words they use to describe quantum physics are also metaphors, entanglement. But entanglement is not a metaphor. It is the nature of reality. And Karen Barad writes about this beautifully in that we are literally entangled, non-locally, where we're not causal, but we're actually correlated to each other. Information about one actually reveals information about another system. So it brings into effect consciousness, which is often left out of the picture, especially in Earth system science. We talk about the atmosphere, we talk about the biosphere, we talk about the cryosphere. We don't talk about shared, collective thought of the noosphere, especially in relation to our relationship to nature. And if we want deliberate changes and transformations to happen, we actually need even more than just hope. We actually need to be able to exert free will and action and actually do something about this. And so consciousness as consciousness of consciousness is bringing that into the question. That's Paulo Freire's idea in conscientization in pedagogy of the oppressed. How do we actually link that? And it brings us to agency. Agency is the most, we cannot just wait and see whether there's hope and wishful thinking, and that's where in our discussions we can talk that there's it's the essence of not just individual agency but collective agency, political agency, our capacity to actually shape the world in a different way in spite of all these power structures, interests, vested interests, etc. And that's where looking when I revised the book after putting out the manuscript, I got lots of feedback, and it really a lot of people were really interested in fractals. Fractals are self-similar patterns that repeat at all scales. They're not like cookie cutters, but they're patterns in nature and geometry and algebra. And if we use the metaphor of social fractals, if we look at how we are actually creating new patterns in our society, whether you are Forum, whether you are MDG, whether you are Oslo, whether you are Norway, that we can create these patterns that actually, if they're based on values that apply to the whole, they actually create a very different aligned pattern. So it's not about similarity, it's about context specificity. And so how do we create those fractals of change? And we can talk about fractal politics and etc. And it comes down to then that you matter, and it's not you just as an individual, but you as a collective, you as the system. And that when we start to actually activate that sense of agency and that sense of potentiality that exists here right now, it's you go from looking at geoengineering as the solution, or nuclear energy, or this, and you say we have 7.5 billion solutions on this planet because everyone is embedded in a system, and we are, so this was actually the first artwork that Tona made, and it was in response to, could you just do the 3 spheres in a kind of a organic way? And so she did that, and it really relates to how do we transform, recognizing that the practical sphere, the systems and the behaviors and technical responses are linked to the political sphere of the systems and the structures, the institutions, the social and cultural norms, etc. But these are all very much related to the personal sphere. And I think the personal sphere, it's the individual and shared beliefs, values, worldviews, and paradigms that we have. And so outcomes for sustainability are, the pivotal pie is that these are all very much related. And when we get to scaling as fractals, we start to see that, it is about the individual. You are part of a family, you're part of a network, you're part of a community, we're in all of these. And so it's that we're not just working at these little old me things, but we're always through conversations, through actions, we're intra-acting with everyone. And so I'll just end by a quote from Buckminster Fuller, who was the inventor and who actually showed in the 1970s that it is possible to feed and give energy to the entire world. And he says, if success or failure of this planet and of human beings depended on how I am and what I do, how would I be? What would I do? And I think that that's the call for all of us to actually be thinking about, how can I matter? So if you're working on climate policy, if you're working on transport, if you're working on just feeding your family, you matter. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
forward to the conversation. And we also have with us Linda Parr, who is the newly elected board leader of the Grandparents Climate Action.
Yes.
And you have also been a climate activist for many years. So really happy to have you. And we also have, on the other side of the age spectrum, we have Mathilde Angeltveit, who is the youth delegate for the climate negotiations. And leading the conversation, we have senior advisor at Forum on climate policies and also food, Lillian Bredal Eriksen. So we all look forward to this conversation. We'll just fix that.
Skal det være på norsk?
Vi kan
Det er da. Ja, det var
det går fint.
Det er sånn.
Thank you very much, Karen, for your very interesting speech, your lecture. It has surely given us something to think on, and maybe it has also given us some new patterns in our thoughts that can lead to transformation. And we all know that we are important parts of the solutions and the change that has to come. So thank you. I will start with a quote from Greta Thunberg. Adults keep saying, we owe it to young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. So, as Greta Thunberg puts it in this quote, should we panic? Could hope also be a hindrance to action? Or is hope a prerequisite for wanting to act? What do you think about that?
The climate movement needs a Greta Thunberg. Somebody that can say exactly where we are, that it is a crisis. Should we all panic? I think Greta addressed a certain type of people, the people in power. And I think the people in power should panic. It seems as if they haven't got the emotional push to do what's necessary. So, but we can't change things in a panic mood, you know, when you're panicked. So we have to have a little hope when we're finished being panicked to be motivated to make change and to think that, yeah, it will make a difference what I do now.
Yeah, I agree. I think I see myself in Greta Thunberg, and I see a lot of my friends in Greta Thunberg, because she talks about hope or panic and these feelings, and I think in the climate movement we shouldn't say that one or some of these feelings are wrong or bad, because we have had the talks in Norway as well about climate shame, or like plain shame. Yeah, these feelings, like some of them being bad and some of them being counterproductive. But I think we need to embrace all of them, because shame, for example, it shows us that we're doing something wrong, and maybe that is important to feel a bit as well. So I think we need to panic. I agree with Greta Thunberg. We need to panic a bit more. And I think the reason especially young people are looking for this is because we don't see the action, right? We don't care if people have hope or if they panic or if they are afraid or if they are ashamed. We don't care about the feelings. We care about what it leads to, right? We care about the action. So I think that's kind of the baseline of it. And I also think she points to not feeling heard and not feeling understood. I read an article recently at forskning.no about British study that had studied climate anxiety. And the headline was Svært få mennesker har klimaangst. Very few people have climate anxiety. And I was like, okay, well, that's good, right? And then I read the article and it said that 5% from the study in Britain, about 5% or 4.6, I think, had climate anxiety. And then I was like, is that very few people? Because this is a medical, like it's a sickness, right? It's medically affecting you, and it's something that is caused by political inaction. And then I think 5% is a lot of people. I just quickly used my calculator, and in Norway that's about 250,000 people. And 250,000 people not getting physical reactions from climate inaction is a lot of people. And then also in the same article I wrote down what it said, because it was a picture of Greta Thunberg. And it said that at 11 she was so afraid of the future that she stopped eating, she stopped speaking, she quit school, and she lost 10 kilograms. That's crazy, right? 250,000 people having these feelings is not few. And of course not all of them maybe lose 10 kilograms, but like my sister, for example, she has also had instances of this, and she's very engaged in this issue, but she had to ask, she just started a new study or a new course, and she had to ask her lecturer, how much are we going to talk about the climate, because I don't know how much I can take. I don't know if I can be in the classroom all the time, because I get physical reactions and I can't sleep, and all of these things. And I think so this was a long story to get to my point, but I think it's a feeling of lack of recognition of the actual fear that a lot of people have. Yeah, so many points there at the same time. You want to?
Yeah, I think I really agree with both of you, and at the same time, I worry about panic, because I think when especially politicians panic, they look for the solutions through the same lens that they frame the problem. And so you get people now talking about authoritarian rule as the better way to deal with climate issues. And you get like, let's just invest in geoengineering. We'll put solar panels in the atmosphere or sulfates in the oceans. And so you skip the little part that's called social change. You skip you forget about equity. And I've heard people say we have to wait with equity. We need to first deal with mitigation. And also working with biodiversity loss. This is all one big problem on how we relate to nature, how we relate to each other. So we cannot afford to stack these issues and deal with climate change. And if we, with people who have money and power, just suddenly go like, Exxon, we'll hire you to take care of geoengineering for the next 40,000 years. And it's just like, wait a minute. And that's where I think that we need to actually look at exactly at what we are proposing as solutions, because not every solution is going to be a good one. Not every solution is just and fair or even will work. So I also, without ever having had that word earlier for climate anxiety, it's like, that's what I've been feeling for 30 some years, God.
Thank you very much. And this leads us to the next question. What is the most important thing to do now? What is the one thing, if you can name one thing, that is very important to move the change and the transformation forward? And you, Karen, have spoken about it particularly. But would you add something onto that?
First, and then you want, yeah.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned this as well in your presentation, but when I read your questions beforehand, my thinking as well is that we have to show the people in power that we are willing to change. And I think we can do that in a lot of different ways. We can do it by demonstrating in front of Stortinget, but we can also do it in the way we act. We can use our purchasing power. We can talk to our friends and family. We can create the kind of common understanding that we are ready for this change that we have to go through. So I think kind of that. I think the politicians are more afraid of their klimatiltak, than they are of the actual problem. So I think we have to show that we can deal with meat being a little bit more expensive when vegetables are less expensive. You know, we can deal with flights being a bit more expensive when trains are not. So I think we have to build this understanding, and we all have to find our different ways of showing that willingness. But I think that's maybe the link that is missing now, because we have the solutions and we know the problem, we know the solutions, but it's just about actually doing it. Yeah.
And one way to show our willingness to change is to strengthen the alliance of organizations and individuals who are concerned and who are willing to change. It's growing. The alliance is growing. It's growing in Norway. It's growing internationally. In Norway, we have the Bridge to the Future, broen til framtiden. And in the course of 10 years, it's grown, and it's still growing. It's an alliance between religious groups, scientists, trade unions, and of course environmental groups. On the international scene, we've just started a network of international grandparents for climate groups, which covers, at this point, different countries in Europe. This kind of alliance will show the politicians that, yes, we're enough people that you can dare to make necessary changes.
I'm feeling more hopeful now. But I think that, like I've been asked that question. I was like, how do we get people out of their cars and things like that? And I was asked to write an opinion piece in Science, and I was like, wait a minute. And then what I kind of thought was is exactly what you're saying. It's like political agency, not the just vote political agency, as important as that is, but the collective. How do we shift that collective, and through conversations, through our, to recognize that we're part of a much larger network of people who care, and it's often a little bit off the radar. We're not so organized, but as Paul Hawken wrote in Blessed Unrest, the largest social movement in history is taking place right now about people who care, but it's not organized, and then of course it's not taking in. And as a U.S. citizen, like I was always just don't go vote, be the politician and things, but voting matters, and it is to change the politicians, not to wait for politicians to change, because they have their interests and they have their worldviews and they have their. So how do we, and that I think in democracy we have to strengthen democracy at a time that it's really falling apart. So. But I think that it is that all these networks, it's the collective that we really, but the individual is the collective and is the system. So that's where we need to create fractals of change.
If I can just continue a little bit, also to take the connection back to Greta Thunberg, because I think about the hope and everything, and adults telling us, "Oh, you guys give us hope because you care so much," and we have had big demonstrations and so on. But the problem is we don't have time to wait for us to come in power, right? We have to do. It's this decade. It's these years. So So I think that's a fear as well, and that's we have to have hope, but we have to have it in the right way, and we have to use. Youth has to be heard now. We can't just wait for them to be prime ministers, right?
Yeah. You have agency now, too.
Exactly.
Agency
Yeah.
when you're born.
Very important. Yeah.
Thank you. The individuals is the system, in a way, and we a lot of us here today are very much into the Paris Agreement and the UN, the work the UN is doing. And we are concerned about if or whether the Paris Agreement will lead us to keep the 1.5 degrees alive, or if we will not reach that goal. And in the Paris Agreement, all parties are held accountable through the so-called common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacity. Through this principle, both developing and middle-income countries safeguard their interests. The interests of developed countries are safeguarded by the expectation that all countries will take the responsibility for cutting emissions. Thus, some of the responsibility is shifted to the developing countries. The interest of middle-income countries, and characterized by the UNFCCC as developing countries, are safeguarded by taking onto too little responsibility for emission cuts, compared to with today's increasing emissions in just those countries. So this is creating some hindrances for the negotiations to move forward. And this is pretty much about the principle of justice and the justice perspective. Has the Paris Agreement become something we try to push onto each other? And will that be a hindrance to reach the Paris Treaty, the Paris Agreement?
There's no other way to go. We have to have agreements which are common, differentiated responsibility, and I wonder if I could just take a little look. We would not have gotten the Paris Agreement had the developing countries not felt that they were taken seriously. Our Grandparents' Climate Campaign, we organized a train down to Paris. 30 of us were at the Alternative Summit together with 60 others from Norway. We got updates on what was happening. It wasn't looking good the first week. After the Alternative Summer, we went over to where they were having the negotiations. We sang, we marched, you know, hand in hand. And they got an agreement. And how did it happen? As far as I know, I wasn't in the room. They made a big circle of all the delegates. All the delegates got to speak and say what they needed to go for the agreement. The change was going from 2 degrees down to almost 1.5. And then we got an agreement. It was such a big event, but that was the key to the whole thing. So going further with the Paris Agreement is also, it's dependent on the developing countries feeling that they get heard and that they take on only their share of the responsibility.
Yeah, that must have been really, really nice. I wanted to go with Natur Ungdom in 2015 as well, but I was too young. I wasn't allowed. But I organized my own march in Sandefjord, and it was very, very, very motivating. But I hold a lot of presentations about the climate negotiations to spread awareness and to try to give, especially young people, more of an understanding of what is happening, because I feel like politicians are often using it against us, or just being like, no, we can't put that goal because it's not in the agreement, or like as a almost hersketeknikk. I think it's important to have more awareness about what is actually happening there. But in those presentations, I often use a video from Cicero from 2011. that is it's very funny. It's just a lot of funny sounds and emojis and things, and it shows all of the countries just going around la 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 and then just pointing at each other, and no one wants to do anything because they just point at each other, and I don't want to do anything unless you do something, and I don't want to do anything unless you give us money, and so on. And it's from 2011, but I still think it shows something about the kind of the way the delegates think at the climate negotiations, and it still shows something about kind of the mood, and then you meet these kind of obstacles all the time, because you will always disagree, and you will always think that, oh, but we have the greenest oil, and we have the poorest people, you know. So I think what's needed is to kind of break out of that, and we start to see it a little bit, but I think many more people have to, or many more countries have to follow, and start, instead of thinking, what's the least I can do and still be within this agreement, or what's the least I can do and still have my legitimacy, which is this is maybe a bit harsh, but I feel like that is Norway's approach often, that they want to do something, but is it because of how the world sees them, or is it because they try to see how much can we possibly do? So I think we have to start, or all countries have to start thinking, how much can we possibly do with our capacity? Because I think that's also what lies behind the common but differentiated responsibilities. You have to, it's not responsibilities that are put from someone else to you and then you do what they tell you. That's not how the Paris Agreement works. It works that we set a common goal, and then everyone has to see, what can I do? So I feel like the negotiations are still lacking a bit of that drive, or that kind of initiative from each of the countries. So yeah, and I guess that's our work, all of us, to just push that narrative. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and I think that responsibility, the ability to respond, is critical here, instead of gaming the system and trying to see just how we can do it. But I think the elephant in the room that is going to be decisive is loss and damages and compensation, because there are equity dimensions, and there's been, since I think it was whether it was Warsaw or it was like COP15 or something, where those have been just shoved under the table. But at some point, we really have to. That dimension is going to come up again and again as we see impacts, explosively all over the world, and then that responsibility, and as whether it's with people who are displaced from their homes, and there's a lot of things that we have to sort out institutionally, collectively, and so the agreement part and working together in solidarity is going to be critical. But leadership is going to, leadership not as what are they doing? Will I look okay? But actually having the courage to take that stand. And you see some countries doing that, and you see the CEO of Patagonia, the earth is our only shareholder, and having the courage. And that's where, again, transformation is about getting uncomfortable. It's about doing things differently. So how do we do things differently? And and I think that's the challenge for not just young people, not just grandparents, everybody. It's how do we do that?
Can I just mention that I think Forum is doing an excellent job in giving demands to the government, and which position they're going to take now in the next summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. So thank you on behalf of us who are also in Forum for the really good job you're doing on that.
Thank you very much. And the next question then is how should we work strategically for making an impact on the during the COP 27. So that is the work we are going to work on now. So it will be a very interesting work and COP, I think. So next question. I think we move on to the question number 4, because the three of you represent the 3 different generations. What do you think about the future? What do you think about the future? Is there hope? And where is the hope?
What the future will bring is up to us. And as a grandmother of 7 wonderful grandchildren and member of Grandparents' Climate Campaign, I'm going to continue to convey a sense of hope to young people in particular. And I will tell them and whoever else wants to hear that yes, we have to cut back on our use of resources. At the same time that a simpler lifestyle does have many advantages, better for our health, it will save the environment, and it will change the focus from things to relationships and our friends and family. That's, I think, what you were talking about when you were talking about an enlivenment paradigm. You know, it's there we want to go. And it's very important that we have a vision of where we want to go. We're not just going to cut out a whole bunch of things. We know what we want, and we may be better off when we get there.
What was the question again? It was if we how we look at the future. How we look at the future. I think we don't lack solutions. We have the technology. We have the science. We know the problems. This is not a problem where we have no idea what to do. This is not a meteor coming towards the Earth and we can just watch it happen. You know, this is something where we have so much science. We have like 50 or something, 60, 70 years of knowledge on this. And we also have a society where is a globalized society. We are able to gather all of the world's countries in one room and let them talk together about climate. That's quite a good utgangspunkt as well. So I think we have all of the tools, and what is left is for us to actually apply them and do them. And it's maybe a bit of the sense of urgency that we lack, or there's many factors and many things, but on the big or a huge picture, all of these systems are human made. And it's like we decide if we want to stop drilling for oil tomorrow, if we want to stop driving cars tomorrow, we can decide to do that. There's no one stopping us. So I think that's what gives me hope, that we have the possibilities, we have the solutions, and we also live in a time where it's not too late. So yeah, you can talk about hope or anything. My biggest fear is apathy, that people get apathetic, because that doesn't help anyone. There's no use in that. So I have hope, because there's that. What else can you have? You know, you have to start there, and then you have to start thinking we're going to reach the 1.5 degree goal. I was like, limit. We're gonna reach it. We're gonna reach our climate goals. Now, how we're gonna do it, right? And that's where the discussion should lie. And those who don't believe in climate change, we don't have time for it. You know, walk on, like find the solutions, implement them, do them, and talk about. And then we can talk about the priorities. You know, should we eat less meat, or should we drive less cars? I don't care. You know, that's a valid discussion. My biggest point is that we have to do either. We have to actually reach our goals. So I think as simple as we are humans, we live in a time where it's not too late, and we live in a time where we have incredible human systems to communicate and to organize our society. So it's entirely possible. So let's do our part to make it possible.
Wow, I'm feeling so inspired. I'm like, yeah, and the future, you know, I was kind of humbled by a future foresight expert once saying to me, because I was like, oh, sea level rise. Oh, it's like, Karen, the future does not exist. And it's like in your head, you're colonizing the future with your, your own visions of it and everything. And that made me realize the future is now, and it's now, and it's now, and it's now. And so the decisions we make, the conversations we have, which is why it's so great to have these conversations, because it does then influence what I do next and what I do next. And that how do we actually facilitate, and especially, like connecting with people, the people who couldn't care less, they're still here. How do we actually engage people for what matters to them, what's important to them? And I think there's a lot of emphasis now on not just climate trauma, but trauma in general, and all the fears that we have and everything like that. And so it is really like this, like it is like we're in this together, and how do we actually like bring it, not so that we're looking to 2030, 2040, 2050, but right here, right now, what do we do differently? And that makes me very inspired that you guys are here and on it, and the forum and everything. And I think that if we actually knew that there's people sitting here in Santiago, Chile, as we speak, in Johannesburg, all over the world that are like this. So how do we actually like kind of take that energy of mattering and just keep at it, as you say, because it's like we don't have a choice really. It's like it's not a world that we haven't seen anything yet, and this is terrible right now. So
I think maybe everybody wonders, what does hope look like? Could you hold it? I'll show it. Okay, we got the Paris Agreement, grands-parents pour le climat. We won the fight to keep Lofoten, Vesterålen, or Senja without oil drilling. We've got wonderful sustainability goals from the United Nations. We've saved a peat bog outside of Oslo from being dug up. We have Greta Thunberg on our side. And the Norwegian Constitution has a very powerful paragraph on climate. It's paragraph 112. So when I take on this well-used hat, which has been in Paris and a lot of other places, and young people see me, what do they say, Matilda?
what we say.
Yeah, at least I get a smile, I get a thumb up, and I get a thanks for everything you're doing for us. So this is a symbol of hope.
Thank you very much for showing us your wonderful hat of hope. Your hopeful hat. It's a good symbol. And I think that the snowball have been rolling for a while now. And it has become quite big. And when the snowball is big enough, it will start rolling even faster and faster. And then we are enough people to do the big changes and everlasting changes, maybe in the societal systems, in the governments, at the UN level.
Before it melts.
Before it melts. Okay. So we have to hurry. Yeah, we all know we have to hurry. But yeah, but we are not on track, and we have to push the snowball a little bit so it will reach it on time, I think. And thank you very much. This conversation gave me hope. I'm a little bit less fearful now. My climate anxiety is a little bit reduced. So I think this is, has been very good. Thank you. And I think we will have to open up for some questions. And Julia, would you like to?
Yeah, is there any
take
questions?
Anyone? Yes. Okay, you might come up here, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. this might be a question a little bit on the side of the main theme, because when I think of
The camera can see you.
yeah, okay, because when I think of hope, I'm witnessing or seeing that in our world the democracy is going more and more down. This is not very hopeful, and it has an impact on climate. So my question is this a reason for more concern?
Who wants to answer?
I can start. This is a very good question, and this is something I think about every week, and I think I think we need to continue talking about it. I think it's very I think part of the climate movement as well is going a bit in that direction, thinking we have to do something now. How do we do something quick? We do it by force, right? And I think that's not sustainable. And like you talk about, we have to build. This is a problem now, but we can't solve the problem by making tens of other problems. And we have to also find solutions that people are in on. I think the pandemic was an example of that. We had very different ways of solving it in China, for example, and in Norway. And in the more authoritarian regimes, you had you got to have the 0 cases for a few weeks, or you had to you got maybe the short-term solution, but then in the long term it will come whether you like it or not. And I think it's the same with kind of resistance, or with the democratic. People will have opinions, and people will resist, and they will resist more if they don't feel like they are included, and if they don't feel like they are part of the solution and the future. So it's a very difficult question, and I think we have to continue talking about it, and we have to continue to raise the concern. And then I also think we have to or at least within the climate movement, we want more authoritarian. We want more and more authoritarian solutions when we see less and less action. So I think that the solution to everything, is showing that we take these concerns seriously and we do something. I think if we fail to do that, it will continue to the society will continue to be more and more polarized, and it will be more and more difficult, and the solutions we will have to take will be more and more radical. So I think we have to continue talking about it, and then we have to do more. Yeah.
Yes, we should be worried about democracy. And I was very disappointed that the suggestion that 16-year-olds could vote didn't go through. I think that's would be an important step to enlarge the democracy, make young people more responsible for what's happening. And I think I heard Karen give a sort of an answer, so I'll let you say that when you showed us the line between thinking me and you and the collective versus the individual. There lies the problem for democracy. So we have to feel like we're part of the whole, the whole system. Maybe you want to say a little more.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, some of the parallels, from speaking for myself, like, just taking democracy for granted and just thinking like, oh, okay, it exists, and I just go and I vote and I do this. But like the climate, which we have taken for granted, it's like, wow, it is actually like this. It's a process, and we actually have to be engaged in the process all the time. And you look one way, and then like it's just. And I think it's scary. But it's also like it's not just this. It's not inevitable that we're getting this authoritarian. There are financial systems that are upholding it, arms trades. There's a lot media systems. There's a lot of things that are going into it, and I think it is again one problem. And so how do we actually do that? We can't stack the problems. We have to really address all of them at once.
I think also just being here and using democracy like we do is a way of working against that as well.
Perfect. Unfortunately, our time is running up, so we have to close for now. But thank you all so much for inspiring thoughts. I think we should all bring a little bit of panic and a little bit of hope, and not least the red hat, with us into the weekend. And then we will take action on Monday, because we don't have any more time. We need to take action. We need to organize to be stronger together, to really go forward to the democracy and demand climate action now already. So with that, I think we can sum up, and thank you all for coming, and take a look at the posters on your way out, and please come back during the next week for many others really interesting seminars, and bring your friends and colleagues as well. Thank you.